Today, we are jumping into a really fascinating legal and political drama. And this one didn't play out on some battlefield, but right inside the quiet diplomatic halls of the United Nations, right at the height of the Cold War.
So, it all comes down to this document, an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. Now, I know it looks like a pretty dry legal text, but trust me, the story behind it is the final chapter in a high-stakes saga about one man's career, international law, and the incredible political pressure on the UN. Let's get into it.
And really, the whole thing boils down to this one incredibly tricky question. What are you supposed to do when one of your own employees, a Soviet national, defects to the United States and then turns around and says, "Hey, I'd like to keep my job"? Well, that seemingly simple request kicked off an absolute international legal firestorm.
Okay, so to really understand how this whole thing ended up at the World Court, we've got to rewind a few years and meet the man who was standing right in the eye of this hurricane.
So, this is our guy, Vladimir Yakovets. From everything we know, he was a good employee, working as a program officer at the UN. He'd been there since 1977, but his employment situation was, let's just say, a little more complicated than most.
In that complication, it all comes down to this one key term, secondment. See, Yakovets wasn't just hired by the UN off the street. He was essentially on loan from the Soviet government. And what that meant was that his job at the UN was basically tied to his home government's approval. This little detail is absolutely critical, so keep it in mind.
Okay, so the whole situation really comes to a boil in February of 1983. In the span of just 3 days, everything, and I mean everything, changed for Vladimir Yakovets. Just look at how fast this all went down. On February 8th, things are looking great for him. His boss wants to keep him on. The very next day, he makes the massive, life-changing decision to apply for political asylum in the US. And by the 10th, he's made it official. He's cut all ties with the Soviet government. There was no going back after that.
And this is where the battle lines are drawn. You've got two sides digging in their heels, creating this huge legal and political standoff, with the UN Secretary General stuck right in the middle.
So here it is, the core of the argument. Yakovets is saying, look, I've done 5 years of good work. A General Assembly resolution says I'm entitled to every reasonable consideration for a permanent job. But the UN, feeling the heat, decided not to extend his contract. Their justification? He was a seconded official, and without the thumbs up from the Soviet Union, the very country he had just defected from, their hands were tied.
Well, as you can probably guess, this dispute was way too hot to handle internally, so it got sent all the way to the top, to the highest court on the planet, the International Court of Justice. They were asked for an advisory opinion.
The court was asked to weigh in on two main things. First, did the UN's own internal court basically just dodge the issue by not deciding if there was a legal impediment to him keeping his job? And second, did that same court just fundamentally get the law wrong when it came to the UN Charter?
On that first question, the answer was a slam dunk, a unanimous no. The court found that the UN's internal tribunal had done its job properly.
But that second question, that was a much closer call. By a vote of 11-3, the court decided that no, the tribunal had not made a legal error. So on paper, Yakovets lost his case. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, those 3 dissenting votes tell a very, very different story.
Yeah, let's talk about the dissent, because this is where the plot really thickens. You have to ask, why did 3 of the world's top judges disagree so strongly with the majority?
Well, Judge Schwabel from the United States, he just cut right to the heart of it. He basically argued that the UN's claim that they gave Yakovets reasonable consideration was pure fantasy. In his opinion, the decision was already made because of politics.
And check this out. For the dissenters, this was like a smoking gun. Judge Sir Robert Jennings from the UK pointed to a letter the UN itself sent to Yakovets. The letter flat out said that because he was on secondment, it was impossible to consider him for another job without the Soviet government's okay. The dissenting judges said, see, that's a clear legal mistake. The UN is just giving away its authority. So let's just break down their argument. They believe the UN never really considered Yakovets at all. The decision was pre-baked, based entirely on the lack of Soviet consent. And this, they said, was a betrayal of the Secretary General's independence, a core idea of the UN Charter. And here's the kicker. How can you possibly claim someone is getting reasonable consideration for a job when at the very same time you ban them from even setting foot inside the building? It just doesn't add up.
So you can see this is about much more than just one man's career. Why does this Cold War case still resonate today? What's the really big principle being fought over here?
It's because the Jacomets case is the perfect snapshot of this fundamental, constant tug-of-war at the heart of the United Nations. It's this epic battle between the ideal of a truly independent, merit-based international workforce that's loyal only to the UN's mission, and the cold, hard reality of political power wielded by the most powerful countries in the world.
And that leaves us with this really challenging question, one that's still just as relevant today. When the political needs of a country smash up against the rights of an individual staff member, who is that person and the UN itself ultimately supposed to serve? Is it their home country, the organization, or the higher principles of the UN Charter? As the Jacomets case makes crystal clear, there are no easy answers.